growing in God's Word, and learning what it means to take up our cross and follow Jesus. This is Crosswalk with Pastor Clay Stevens from Cross Culture Church in Raleigh.
If God says He has plans for you, if the obstacles come into your life, how many of those obstacles are obstacles that you think God could not overcome? None. Zero. That's right.
The obstacles we face are actually there and happening in life to mold us into a better person. An obstacle is simply an opportunity in disguise, an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to change, an opportunity to help others, and an opportunity to become the man or woman you were born to be. Nehemiah was a man who faced incredible obstacles. And in today's message in the series, Winning the Game of Life, Pastor Clay continues into part 2 of last week's lesson, showing us how Nehemiah overcame his obstacles and how we can as well. We hope you're blessed by this week's Crosswalk and the message, Overcoming Your Obstacles.
We're talking about obstacles, and it's the second part of obstacles. Last week I asked for a show of hands. I think almost everybody raised their hands. Everybody has obstacles in their life. Now, how you define those may vary, and what the intensity of them are may vary, and there may be other things that come in your life. But obstacles are things that are keeping you from getting to a different place in your life. They're keeping you at a place in your life where you don't want to be, or something that you need to overcome in your life. And we're looking at the book of Nehemiah because Nehemiah, if you're here last week, you remember Nehemiah, this cupbearer for the king, the guy who pours the drink for the king, the guy that more than likely tests it to make sure there's nothing in it or all that kind of stuff. Nehemiah receives news about his homeland being Jerusalem. And I won't go into all that historical background again this week, but basically Nehemiah has grown up in captivity, being carried off, or his family was carried off by the Babylonians, who themselves have now been conquered by the Medes and the Persians. Nehemiah has grown up in the capital of Susa. He was taken, or his family was taken, from Jerusalem in the southern kingdom of Judah. And in God's providence, some of the Jews had begun to be allowed to go back into the land of Israel. After about 70 years, they start going back into the land. Ezra, the priest, is the guy that begins to lead them out. And they've been going back, but times are hard back in Jerusalem. The economic situation is bad. The physical condition of the city is bad. Some houses, some buildings have been rebuilt, but the walls of the city, and as I talked about last week, those were vital to the health, the welfare, and even the status of the city. There was some sense of prestige in the walls of your city. The bigger they were, or the taller they were, or the stronger they were, it was kind of an indication that this was a city that was well off. So there's even some status to it as well. But primarily, it was just flat out dangerous to not have walls around your city. Well, they don't have walls yet around their city. And one of Nehemiah's brothers and some countrymen return from Jerusalem, and they give him that news. And I'm not going to go back and read it all this morning, but what happens is Nehemiah just becomes broken over this news about what's happened in Jerusalem, or what's not happening in Jerusalem. By now, certainly he had hoped maybe the people would be rallying together, and the first group that had been returning, that maybe they'd be getting to work and getting things done, but things are still bad. And Nehemiah just sits down, and he just breaks down, and he begins to weep and cry and just broken over this condition of people that are his people, even though he may or may not have known any of them. They were his people, and he was broken over the condition of it. You and I can kind of understand that. We hear the news of a hurricane that hits in Louisiana and devastates a city, and X number of people are killed, and homes are wiped out. And even though we may not necessarily know anybody there, our hearts can go out to it, and we can be broken over a situation. That's what happened with Nehemiah. And as I said last week, that's really kind of the first step in coming to this place where you overcome your obstacles. Here's what we said. Here's the first idea that I shared with you last week. In order to do it, to overcome obstacles, you've got to get a burden. You have to be burdened enough to do something about it. And if you fill in blanks on your outline, I think that one's already filled in. But you've got to get burdened about the fact that something is not right in your life, or something is not right in a situation, or something's not right in whatever it might be. You've got to care enough to do something about it. To just say, oh, well, this is bad, but never really get burdened about it to the point where you're willing to take some action in it. See, that's what happened with Nehemiah. He got burdened over the situation. The obstacle was the walls are torn down. The obstacle was the people are living in danger and fear and in terrible conditions. The obstacle was Nehemiah's in Susa. All this is going on in Jerusalem. How's things ever going to get any better? That's the obstacle. And the first place it had to start with this burden that Nehemiah had. And if you were here last week, you know that I did, and I will again this week, make some specific application to us as a church, as Cross Culture. We've launched about a month ago. We've been meeting for some time now, and where we're going as a church is, I believe, very, very important to the world in which we live, and very, very important in our lives as well. And I mentioned to you last week that truly this church was birthed out of a burden that God laid on my heart. And I, not only my heart, is what I discovered as I talked to people, not only my heart, but other people's hearts, but birthed in my heart this burden for a church that could significantly impact Raleigh and Durham and the surrounding areas and wherever else God would give us to go. And one of the things I said to you, I think, was that I need you even more than me. They need you. Those people that are out there this week that are still in their beds, or they're heading for the golf course or the lake or the wherever. And I know there's lots of great things to do, and it's a beautiful day. But all of those people that are out there and perhaps don't know about this God that loves them, they need you to give a rip, as Nehemiah did, quite honestly. We have some statements around here that we like to use. One of those is our passion statement. And I thought that was good to bring out, because our passion statement really exemplifies what should be a burden. It's more than just a slogan for us, or it ought to be. It ought to be a burden. Our passion is this: taking the cross to our culture and taking our culture to the cross. In other words, as we take the message of Christ to the world around us. And that's what I mean by culture. It's your neighbor. It's your coworker. It's the lady at the checkout aisle. It's the people that we engage on a daily basis. As we take the message of the cross to them, what we will see is that God will draw those people to Himself. God will draw those people to the cross of Christ. And we'll see people giving their lives to Christ in, I believe, unbelievable numbers. It's got to begin with a burden. And in personal application of your life, again, let me just say, you may not like a situation you're in, but do you care enough to actually do something about it? Begins with a burden. Second idea that we shared last week was this: overcome obstacles, you got to be bold enough to risk everything. Nehemiah lays it all on the line. He goes before the king when he's clearly broken and burdened and depressed, really, over this situation, and the king picks up on it right away, and he says, hey, why are you sad? Because the king knows, and Nehemiah knows, that it's illegal to be sad in the king's presence. We talked about that last week. It could cost Nehemiah his life, but the burden is so great that he's come to this place where he's got to be bold enough to do something about it. And he just lays it all out there. And he says, King, why shouldn't I be sad? Here's what's happening back in my hometown. Here's the condition of the people. Here's the condition of the city. Why shouldn't I be sad over this? It's a willingness to be bold enough to step out and say, I don't care. I don't care. This is too important to sit on the sidelines, or this is too important to just resign myself to the fact that this is just the way it is. It's time to be bold enough to actually do something about it. So, those were two ideas that we get from the life of Nehemiah. Get a burden and get bold about doing something with the obstacles in your life. Now, let's look at a third and a fourth idea this morning in the time that we have left. Here we go. Third idea I want you to get a hold of today: to overcome obstacles, be serious enough to develop a plan. Burden? Great. Bold? Super. How about a plan? Let's look at it in chapter 2. Verse 6, chapter 2. Then the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him. Now remember, this is right after Nehemiah's, said, why shouldn't I be sad, king? Here's what's happening, here's what's going on. And he gets bold right in the king's presence, and apparently in the queen's presence as well. Then the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress, which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house to which I will go. And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of my God was on me. Then I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it, we'll talk more about them in a few minutes, it was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days, and I arose in the night, and a few men with me. I did not tell anyone what my God was putting into my mind to do for Jerusalem, and there was no animal with me except the animal on which I was riding. So I went out at night by the valley gate to the direction of the dragon's well, and on to the refuse gate, inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire. And then I passed on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass, so I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall, and then I entered the valley gate again and returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. Nehemiah gets a burden. Nehemiah gets bold enough to do something about it. But that's not enough. Nehemiah knows he needs a plan. And so as he prays and he seeks God's direction and God's will, God begins to reveal to him a plan. And we know that Nehemiah is ready with this plan because the king says to him, how long will you be gone and when will you return? That's basically the king's way of saying, what do you need, Nehemiah? What do you need for this trip? And here's what Nehemiah says. Nehemiah says, I'll tell you what, king, here's what I need. I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. Nehemiah's got a plan. He's prepared. It's a plan that is prepared. It's prayed up, thought through, and Nehemiah is ready. When God opens the door, Nehemiah is ready to step through to begin to overcome the obstacle. Why? Because he's developed a plan. Yes, a God-birthed, God-breathed, God-given plan, but a plan nonetheless, a plan to overcome the obstacles to which was the walls in Jerusalem. You got to have a plan. He's prepared. And you can tell that he's prepared because when the king asks the question about what all will you need, you can tell that Nehemiah's given some thought to this because he just had to have been in that place where he said, well, I better be ready. If God moves in this king's life and he asked me, I've got to be prepared. So let's see, I'm going to need letters as I cross all the different provinces. Every one of those guys are going to try and stop me. So I'm going to need some letters from the kings, making sure I can get through. And we'll see. Well, if I'm going there to rebuild the walls and the doors, the gates, there's no sense in going if I don't have any lumber. So I need to have the king get a letter off to Asaph, the king's force keeper, and he can cut me down the timber that I need. In other words, he's thought through this thing. And when the door again of opportunity opens, pow, Nehemiah is ready to step through. It is a prepared plan. Now, let me also say this to you. It's important to have a prepared plan, yes. It is important to be prayed up. It's important to be thinking about what all you're going to need and setting things aside and it's important to do all of that stuff. But you know what? It's okay for the plan to have some flexibility as well, and that's exactly what Nehemiah's plan has. Yeah, you need to have a prepared plan, but you also need to have a plan that is flexible. That's what he's doing when he's going up through the walls at night, going out through the gates, and he's checking everything out. He's not telling anybody yet what he's doing. Why? Because he's not even sure yet what all he's doing. He knows what God's burdened him about, but how do you get it done? See, the part of the plan is coming as he goes. As he goes. See, a plan doesn't have to... listen. For those of y'all that have to cross every one of your T's and dot every one of your I's before it can happen, a plan doesn't have to have all the answers to be a good plan. It just has to be God-directed to be a good plan. If you think about it, it would make sense that not all the answers would be in advance. If we're including God in the equation, which I hope we are, anything I'm going to do, any obstacle I'm going to try to overcome, I hope God's part of that equation. If it is, then it would stand to reason that because God desires to have us walk by faith and not by sight, it stands to reason that He would only reveal enough to help us to the next step and the next step and the next step, and not reveal every bit of the plan right out in advance. I get tickled about it sometimes, but I'll tell you, if I've been asked once, I've been asked 1,000,000 times, I'll bet. Well, when are we getting a building, Pastor? When are we getting our own space? When are we getting land? I swear I was being asked that question like after the first week we began to meet together. When are we getting our own building, Pastor? And I don't know. I'm sure that probably not every person has liked the answer necessarily that I've given them, but I've been just as honest as I can be when I've said to you or whoever may have asked me that, I don't know. God hasn't told me that yet. God hasn't revealed that to us yet. And you know what? It's okay. It's all right to just keep walking in faith, believing that God is moving and that God has a plan. And if I don't know all the plan at this point, well, that's all right. God will reveal it in His timing. But you got to have a plan. I was thinking this week about, anybody remember the movie Rudy? Anybody ever see it? Okay, not too many people have seen Rudy. Rudy is a true story based on the life of Rudy Rudiger. Rudy Rudiger. I was reading up a little bit on Rudy last night. I've seen the movie a couple times, but I was reading up on Rudy last night. It's a great movie, by the way. If you've never seen it, great movie, true story. Rudy wants to play football for the University of Notre Dame. He wants to go to the University of Notre Dame, and he wants to play football for the University of Notre Dame. That's his lifelong passion. His dad is a huge Notre Dame fan. Pretty much everybody in his small town was. And Rudy's dream was to play football for the University of Notre Dame. Rudy's got some obstacles. Number one, he's 5'6" and 165 pounds. Not your prototype Notre Dame player. Number two, Rudy's grades really aren't good enough to get into Notre Dame, quite honestly. And number three, Rudy doesn't even have the money to go to Notre Dame, even if he was smart enough and strong enough to get in. He doesn't even have the money. Besides all that, most of the folks in his life, certainly his family, was telling him, you can't, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. You can't ever overcome that. You can't play football for the University of Notre Dame. Look at you. In the movie, if I remember right, there's this line where his dad says, Rudigers don't belong at Notre Dame. So what does Rudy do? Does he cash it in? He said, well, that's it. That's just it. It's just the way it's going to be. I'm just going to live my life like this and just live in this mill town, work for this mill here, and that's it. No, he won't do that. There's too much passion. There's too much burden in his life to let it go. So you know what? Rudy develops a plan. Now, I don't know that he wrote it all out. I doubt if he did. But he goes and he enrolls in the junior college that's there in the same town as Notre Dame, South Bend. He enrolls at Holy Cross. And he starts working to bring his grades up so that he can transfer. And he gets a job as a part of the maintenance crew there at the University of Notre Dame so he can stay kind of close to the action. He keeps working out. He begins to save his money, and he begins to apply for Notre Dame each time. And in his last semester that he's eligible, he gets accepted at the University of Notre Dame. He gets to go to Notre Dame, and then he goes and he tries out for the football team as a walk-on. And he makes the team basically as a tackling dummy is what they were going to use for. It didn't matter. That didn't matter to Rudy. What mattered was that he did something about what needed to be done. I don't care what your obstacle is. If you just sit around and are emboldened about it or passionate about it or whatever about it, if that's all that ever happens, that's not enough. I told you a moment ago, and I said last week, the birth of this church came as a result of a burden, a passion to see people's lives change, but it's not enough. It's not enough. You've got to have a plan. I just thought it would be good just to remind some of us this morning, maybe show some of you for the first time, what part of our plan looks like here at Cross Culture, because we got obstacles to overcome. We got a lot of obstacles. That air conditioner is an obstacle to me right now. We've got to overcome, but we can't do it without a plan. So I thought it'd be good just to remind you of just a couple. Now, we got a lot of different things. We've got our DNA, our defining non-negotiable absolutes. We've got a vision statement. We've got things like that are part of our plan. But I thought I'd remind you just a couple things today. Our purpose statement and our strategy, just so you can be reminded of a couple of those things. This idea of developing a plan. Here's our purpose. It breaks down into three areas. Here's our purpose: to connect to our culture with a Christ-centered calling. Number one, we've got to connect to our culture with a Christ-centered calling. Why? Because the Word of God says this. After Jesus had greeted them again, He said, "I am sending you," what does that last part say? Say it with me. "Just as the Father has sent me." Just not too many ways to interpret that, quite honestly. It's like, well, I'm not sure if the Bible, that's pretty clear. I'm sending you just the Father has sent me. We're to connect to our culture because we have a Christ-centered calling to go and to connect to the nations. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of how all that means, except to say that how that happens is by us cultivating our relationships, the people that we know, growing those relationships, getting to know them, investing in their lives, customizing our evangelism so that we reach people where they are and share the message of the gospel with them, and we challenge our culture with the message that Christ has died for them, a sinner, and they need Christ in their life. So it's a Christ-centered calling. That's part of our purpose, and it makes part of our plan for overcoming the obstacles that we face as a church. Second part was this: to change our culture through a Christ-centered compassion. We connect and then we change through a Christ-centered compassion. We're getting back to that idea of the burden. Somebody ought to care. Somebody ought to care. Jesus did. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give His life a ransom for many. If Jesus served, I'm pretty sure I ought to serve. By the way, while we're on that subject of service, we got lots of places we can plug you in. Just name that tune, folks. We got places we can plug you in. We'll have hopefully in the next few weeks, we can have a table set up with some sign-up opportunities for you in different ways. But what goes on here on a Sunday morning is a lot of people involved in children's ministry, student ministry, adult ministry, corporate worship, a lot of different ways that you can be involved in that. But here's what it looks like. We've got to have caring hearts. Like I said, somebody's got to care about it. We need committed hands to put our hands to the work and get it done. And we need creative minds. We need you to think creatively and to come up with ways, how can we make a difference in this school or the schools on either side of us? How can we impact them? How can this community know that we're here and even care that we're here? Why? Because we serve them. That's what Jesus came to do. It's what He's called us to do. So we change our culture, and then last, we create in our culture a Christ-centered community. That's what we're doing. We're building a Christ-centered community. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's part of the reason for the name of this church, Cross Culture Church, a culture built on the cross of Jesus Christ, on the idea of denying myself and taking up my cross and following Him. And man, that's hard, isn't it? But nevertheless, that's what we're called to do. That's part of the plan. That's how we're going to do it. Consecration of ourselves, setting ourselves aside and saying, this is what God has called me to do, to be a part of a local body that can impact the world in a significant way. The celebration of our God, we're going to do it all the time in our life groups, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, in our corporate worship, just celebrating God and His goodness and what He's done for us. And then the last part is the collaboration of our lives, coming together and saying, you know what, that person's different from me, or they're not maybe the same age as me, but we are all coming together and we're getting this thing done. Why? Because under the banner of Christ, social distinctives. There's no color barriers. There's no ages, no anything. It's just the body of Christ coming together for the purposes of glorifying God and accomplishing the work that God would have us to do. So that's part of our purpose statement. That's part of our plan, is our purpose statement. And then the second thing I want to give to you real quick this morning is just to remind you of this, is our strategy. Cross Culture Church's strategy is simple. Maybe some of you didn't know this, so this may be new to you. Rather than having a seemingly endless array of programs that pull us in every direction, we will focus on two areas: a weekly large group experience known as Cross Culture Worship, and a small group gathering known as Cross Culture Life Groups. That's it. We'll strive to do these two ministries with excellence, quality, and effectiveness. Now, other things will come off of those two things. We'll do missions, we'll do ministry, we'll do lots of things off of those two things, but that's what we're focusing on: corporate worship and life groups, building the body of Christ, inviting others to come and seeing them come into a relationship with Christ, and then seeing them grow up in a relationship with God. It's a plan. The barriers that we face, quite honestly, are significant, but they're not impossible. One of my favorite verses, anytime you talk about plan, I guess you have to use this verse. I love to use Jeremiah 29:11. You probably know it, but it says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope." Now, Jeremiah wrote that at a time to the nation of Israel when they were being carried off into captivity, or about to be carried off into captivity. And God was saying to them, even though you've rebelled against me and you've left me and you turned away from me, I'm not done with you. I've still got plans for you. But there's absolutely no reason why that application can't be made to our individual lives as well. Since God allows us to enter in a relationship with Him, we become part of His family. Why wouldn't our Heavenly Father have plans for our lives? And listen, based on that verse, I want you to think about this: the obstacles that come into your life. If God says He has plans for you, if the obstacles come into your life, how many of those obstacles are obstacles that you think God could not overcome? None. Zero. That's right, my brother. That's why I like just a little farther on in Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 27. "I am the Lord, the God of all the peoples of the world. Is anything too hard for me?" By the way, that's a rhetorical question. We really don't need to answer that one. There's nothing too hard for Him. Your obstacle may be that you're a single parent and it's just tough to make it financially or emotionally. Your obstacle may be that you just hate your job. It's just a job that just pulls you down, and it's your obstacle may be Your obstacle may be that you want to go to college and you don't know where you're going to find the money. Your obstacle may be that you want to go on a mission trip, but you're afraid of flying. It doesn't matter what the obstacle is. And the plan that it takes to overcome that obstacle may take a different shape and different form to different people, but the starting point for the plan has to be the same place, and that's God. The key is prayer and fasting, seeking God's face, moving when God says move, and following His direction, even when God hasn't spoken clearly yet as to what everything will be or how every step will look, but believing God for what He will do. You got to have a plan. And then, how much time? I don't have any time left, but I'll give you the last one. How I'm going to get it done? We don't know. What's the last one? All right. To overcome obstacles, here's the last one. Be strong enough to get it done. Get a burden, get bold, get serious, and then get strong. Be strong enough to get it done. Do you remember, let me just jump right. Anybody remember the movie Karate Kid? This is movie day, I guess. I'm talking about movies. Karate Kid? Yeah. Apparently y'all are on fan clubs or something. Y'all jumped right up there. BJ and Nicole are like, yeah, that's right. Do you remember, he's Mr. Miyagi, he's going to help Daniel-san out, right? Because Daniel-san got the mess beat out of him by those guys in the skeleton suits. And so Mr. Miyagi's going to help him, but when Daniel-san goes to get help, Mr. Miyagi says, here, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. And he does waxes all the cars, and he says, here, sand the floor, sand the floor, sand the floor, sand the floor. Right? This is my best Mr. Miyagi impersonation. And then, remember, paint a fence, paint a fence, paint a fence, Paint a fence. And this goes on, I don't know, a few days, and Daniel-san gets really ticked off about this, right? Because he didn't sign up for this. He signed up to overcome this obstacle of getting the mess kicked out of him every time he goes to school because he wants to date that good-looking blonde chick. But he keeps getting beat up, and that's the obstacle he's got to overcome. But what Daniel-san didn't understand, so Mr. Miyagi showed him, was that some of the trials and difficulties that was coming into his life were coming as a result of Mr. Miyagi bringing them so that Daniel-san would be strong enough to actually overcome the obstacle that was the greatest in his life. And so some of the events that came into his life, while unpleasant, were actually designed to strengthen Daniel-san. Now, let me just real quickly, and I'll just have to run through it. I can't give you much on it. I don't know what's the matter with my mic today. Let me give you just some things that you can add to this. I think you got some blanks. You can fill them in. Be strong enough to get it done. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do it. Number one, get others involved. I got to read something to you. Get others involved. Now, how do you do that? Well, give them your burden. Give them your burden. Verse 17. Is that right, Ernie? I'm lost here, am I right? Yeah. Verse 17. Then I said to them, this is Nehemiah, and he's talking about what he said. Then I said to them, meaning the people, you see the bad situation we're in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach. And I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Watch this. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. Now they've been laying there in that situation for who knows how long. Nehemiah's back in Susa. He's doing okay. He's the cupbearer to the king. He's not hurting, but he gets a burden, and he comes over there, and these folks, they're just living in this condition. They've probably gotten used to it. They said, well, this is just my life. That's where some of y'all are right now in the obstacles of your life. Well, it's just my life. This is the way it is. And what does Nehemiah do? He gives them his burden. He says, look at this. Look at this mess we're living in right here. And so what do they say? Well, come on. Let's rebuild these walls. Give them your burden. You need other people involved. Get them involved. Get them your burden. Here's another thing you can do to get them involved. Show them your courage. Verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this thing you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Uh-oh. So I answered them, Nehemiah, and said to them, the God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. Basically, Nehemiah says, get out of my face, Sanballat, and take your Tobiah-looking brother with you. And listen, there's a not-so-veiled thread in there. Oh, you planning to rebel against the king, aren't you? Word gets back to the king on that stuff. Kings aren't real keen on people trying to overthrow them. That's a not-so-veiled threat. Nehemiah says, I'll tell you one thing, God's going to help us rebuild this wall, and you got no part in it. Man, that's cool. Talk about bold. You want other people involved and to work with you? Let them see your courage. Let them see that you're not afraid to take this thing on, whatever it is in your life. All right, hey, so much to say. Where we go, Ernie? Get others involved. Second, be willing to pay the price. I can't read it all, but if you go on and you read it in chapter 5, I guess it is. Let me see here. Yeah, go on and read it. In chapter 5, verse 14 through 19, Nehemiah tells the account how he's 12 years into this thing, man. Now the wall is rebuilt way before then, but he's a long time into this. He gets elected as a governor. King appoints him as governor. And Nehemiah recounts all that he has been willing to give up and do without and sacrifice to get done what needed to be done. And that's what has to happen in our lives. We're going to overcome obstacles. We got to be willing to pay the price. It's one thing to be bold enough. It's another thing to actually give things up in your life in order to accomplish whatever it is that God's trying to help you overcome in your life. Be willing to pay the price. Third, refuse to be distracted. In verse 6, Sanballat and Tobiah and their whole posse, they come back again. They send one of their servants over while Nehemiah is working hard on the wall. And they say, hey, come on down and come over. Let's talk about this whole thing and your plan and what's going on. Let's just talk about this kind of stuff. See, Sanballat and Tobiah and all them, they were basically set up as rulers in Jerusalem after most of them been carried off in captivity. They didn't want the walls rebuilt. They didn't want to see somebody coming and being involved in this thing. So come on, why don't you come on down? Come talk to us about this. I can promise you, anytime you start to overcome some new thing in your life, you want to start doing something that is going to take you in a new direction or a greater good for your life, there's always going to be something or someone that's going to distract you. Oh, now come on, that's a good idea, but come on, you really can't. That's not going to happen. Or let's get involved in this over here. Or why don't we put our time into some of this? If you want to really overcome it, you got to not be distracted by it. A lot to say about that, but one other idea. Refuse to be distracted. And the last one, give God the glory. Let me read it to you in chapter 6, because I want you to hear this. Chapter 6, verse 15. So the wall was completed on the 25th of the month Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies, watch this, when all our enemies heard of it and all the nations surrounding us saw it, they lost their confidence, for they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. What had seemed like an impossible obstacle 52 days earlier had suddenly become an improbable miracle. Because God intervened, God stirred the people's hearts, God provided the resources from a pagan king, and God got the work done. The obstacles in your life, if you'll seek God out, if you'll seek His will, He will move. But when God moves, you have to be careful to give God the glory. You have to be quick to say, listen, I appreciate that, but God's done this thing. It's God at work here. It's God making this happen. It's God that gave me victory here. It's God that allowed this to happen. It's God that did this. Because if God gets the glory in your lives, ladies and gentlemen, then you're in position for God to continue to work and move in your lives to give you greater and greater and greater victories. So that we ought to be able to say, to God be the glory, great things He has done.
Life throws some pretty big obstacles in our path at times, but as we learn today from the life of Nehemiah, we don't have to be overwhelmed, because through God's power, we can overcome. Caring enough to do something about it is the starting line, but the end result is God being glorified in our lives as He brings us the victory. Well, we're glad that you could join us this week for Crosswalk, and we extend a cordial invitation for you to join us live and be a part of our weekly Cross Culture Worship. Cross Culture Church meets Sunday mornings at 10 at the Leesville Road Middle School in Raleigh, a mile and a half south of I-540. We welcome anyone looking for a place to learn about God's plan for their life. At Cross Culture, you'll find a community of believers with the desire to be used by God to show that a life built on the finished work of Christ on the cross is where you'll find what you're looking for. Cross Culture Church, a new church for people like you. Learn more about us, who we are, what we're about, what we do, and what we believe. Visit us online at crossculturelife.org. Cross Culture Church, taking the cross to our culture and taking our culture to the cross.